We are less than an hour from former President Donald Trump's arrival at the federal courthouse in Miami.
The former president has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing in the special counsel's classified documents case. Let's bring in CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, of the 37 counts against the former president, I would like to hear, should there be one or a few, or which ones should his legal team be most concerned about?
Frankly, if the indictment holds, meaning there aren't pieces of evidence that are thrown out, all of them. I know that sounds like I'm avoiding the question, but this is a really strong case here. Now, for instance, let's think about the Espionage Act. I know people tend to think of this as meaning you're a spy, but it doesn't necessarily, as Lilia, you and I have talked about. It can mean the unlawful retention of documents related to the national defense. And if you listen to the audio recording or read the transcript that is part of the indictment, where you have the former president essentially admitting, I shouldn't have these documents. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but I can't declassify them. I could have when I was president, but I can't now, and they're secret. Or the pieces of evidence that are in the indictment where the former president is apparently saying to his attorney, which would be worse, if we hand things over or if we just say, no, we don't have anything? I mean, all of those pieces of evidence, again, if they are presented to a jury, they are really damning. If we were talking about Donald Jones, not Donald Trump or Donald Smith, we would be using words like slam dunk case.
All right, and we're watching as the motorcade appears to be picking up some steam in terms, keep seeing sort of motorcycle officers leaving Doral while the president, former president, is going to make his way to the courthouse. Jessica, you just mentioned something that struck me about what the jury will consider. I guess the question I have is, how do you pick a jury in this particular situation where you are dealing not with Donald Jones, but with Donald Trump?
So I actually have some optimism here in the sense that we don't ask jurors to have never voted or not have any political views. What we ask them to do is when they go behind that box or when they go into the jury deliberation room, we ask them to put their personal bias aside and to apply the law to the facts. And frankly, typically we're quite successful at that. So is the fact that we're going to, if there is a jury trial, hold it in Florida good for the former president? Obviously, the jury pool is much more favorable, at least politically, to the former president. If you look at just what percentage of people in Florida voted for Trump versus voted for Biden, much more favorable than a DC jury, for instance. But again, we don't ask that people have no opinion of the former president or have no political opinion of them. We ask that when they go into that courtroom, they can fairly listen to the evidence, they can fairly look at the law, and they can apply the facts to the law. And jurors tend to take that role very, very seriously. That's what jury selection will be about. It won't be, who did you vote for? It will be, can you impartially do this job?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to wonder when talking about jurors in politics and a figure that arises so much passion as former President Donald Trump. And also there's a difference between Miami and, say, Fort Pierce, where this could also go to. But I want to get a little bit more into the details of the case and what avenues are possible for former President Donald Trump. We're talking about Espionage Act charges. You described a little bit of that. I think it's important to note and to remind the viewers, does it have to prove that he actually, was doing any kind of spying or showing things to people? There are two charges that he allegedly was showing these classified documents to people that he shouldn't have. And if the case is so strong, what options does his team have? I mean, can he take a plea at some point? I don't think he will, but you can tell us. Can the charges be dismissed? I mean, what other options are there other than this going to trial?
Well, great questions. And I actually want to pick up something, Lilia, on something you asked me yesterday. But first, what are the main defenses we're going to see here? I think the best possible defense for the former president is to say that some of what we saw in the indictment should never be presented to the jury because it's actually covered by the attorney-client privilege. Right. So some of the most damning pieces of information in the indictment actually come from the former president's attorney. And that's because another federal judge said there's an exception to the attorney-client privilege. It's called this crime fraud exception, exactly as it sounds, which is typically if you go to an attorney, what you say in terms of seeking legal counsel is protected by a privilege. The attorney can't tell people, but if you say, could you help me in accomplishing a crime or a fraud, in perpetrating a crime or a fraud, then an exception can apply. And then that's how the special counsel in this case gets that information. Now, I think based on what we know and based on what we saw in the indictment, that the federal judge who ruled that exception applied, that ruling is on strong legal ground. But having said that, of the defenses available to the former president, it's probably the strongest. And again, it would eliminate some of the most damning evidence against him. Now, we've also talked about other potential defenses like selective prosecution. I don't think there's, based on the public reporting, not much there to help the former president. We've also talked about, what about the idea that maybe he declassified a lot of these documents? Now, I don't think that's helpful for two reasons. One is a lot of these federal crimes do not depend on the classification status. You can obstruct justice with declassified documents. In addition, again, if the parts of the indictment that we saw actually are presented to a jury, they totally undercut that. You have the former president saying, I could have declassified this, I didn't, and it's secret. So not a lot of places for the former president to go. Lily, if you want to pick up on the potential dismissal, we can talk about that as well.
All right, Jessica, we want to ask you to just sit tight for a second. We're going to come back to you.